Marsh Ironeyes' death. Once the leader of a Scar rebellion against the Lord Ruler, he gave up his own name to infiltrate the Ministry, and in doing so eventually sacrificed his free will to ruin. Let's take a look at Marsh, the man before the Inquisitor, who he became after, and what lies in store for him in future eras. Welcome to Second Breakfast. My name's Lee. Join me as we explore the lore, theories, and biggest questions of the Cosmere. Because if I have the questions, maybe you do too. If that sounds like your cup of tea, consider subscribing and joining us for future journeys into the Cosmere. Before he was Ironeyes, before he was Death, Marsh was just Kelsier's older brother. Details of Marsh and Kelsier's parents are sparse. However, we know that they were born half Scar. Their father was a nobleman, their mother a Scar. And for a time, their mother kept her Scar heritage a secret, in fear for the life of her children. But eventually, their father found out the truth, and so he had their mother killed by the Obligators. This single act shaped who Marsh and Kelsier would later become. Kelsier came out of it hating the nobility, but Marsh's anger took a different form, focusing on the institutions of the final empire itself, particularly the Steel Ministry and the Obligators who enforced its rule. The trauma surrounding his mother's death appears to have been what caused Marsh to snap and become a Seeker, an Allomancer able to burn bronze and sense other Allomancers nearby. Marsh threw himself into the Scar Rebellion, eventually becoming one of its leaders. But rebellion against the immortal Lord Ruler with absolute control over Allomancy is a tough proposition. And then there was Mare, the woman Marsh loved, but the woman who chose Kelsier instead. So while Marsh and Kelsier never saw eye to eye, this only sought to further the tension between them. And then came the heist at Credit Shore. Kelsier and Mare went after the Lord Ruler's secret vault. However, things didn't go according to plan, and they were eventually caught and sent to the pits of Hathsin. The pits were labour camps where Scar were worked to death mining for atium. Kelsier barely escaped with his life, and Mare never escaped at all. For Marsh, years of failure and mounting casualties had already taken their toll. Mare's death only reinforced what he had increasingly come to believe. The rebellion against the final empire was dangerous, costly, and ultimately futile. And so he handed leadership to Yaden, whose approach to the rebellion was quieter and more covert. And when Kelsier eventually escaped the pits, having snapped into a Mistborn after Mare's death, he came home with plans to start the whole thing over again. Marsh wasn't exactly thrilled to see him. Their reunion is described by Kelsier noting the same glint of disappointment in his brother's eyes that had been there since childhood. Marsh thought it was still a game to Kelsier. He brought up, almost immediately, the 11 noblemen Kelsier had murdered the night before. Marsh argued that they were products of the same world as everybody else, born into privilege just as the Scar were born into oppression, and he rejected the idea that noble birth alone made someone deserving of death. That's the dynamic readers walk into in the final empire. A stern older brother and a reckless younger one, and a dead woman between them that neither one of them could quite put down. Despite his doubts, Marsh joined Kelsier's crew anyway. In fact, he's even the one who notices Vin first. As a Seeker, Marsh can sense Allomancy. He picks up on Vin's instinctive, untrained use of her powers and flags her to Kelsier. Without Marsh, there's a reasonable argument that Vin never gets recruited at all. Marsh's job within the crew is infiltration. He infiltrates the Steel Ministry itself, posing as an acolyte's obligator, gathering information that could assist in the rebellion. He wants answers: how Inquisitors are made, why they're stronger than ordinary Allomancers, and most importantly, how to kill them. The obligators training him promote him quickly, impressed by his competence. Marsh proves exceptionally good at the job, advancing through the ministry far faster than anyone expected. But the deeper he goes, the more dangerous his position becomes. The Canton of Inquisition had been watching him, and Marsh was walking into a trap he didn't yet realise had been laid for him. Seekers were rare and valuable, and exactly what the Inquisitors wanted to recruit, even by force, if necessary. In a grim irony, Marsh infiltrated the ministry to learn the weaknesses of Inquisitors. Instead, he became one himself, spiked through the eyes, the signature mutilation of a Steel Inquisitor, and with it, allomantic and ferrochemical power far beyond what he had as a Misting. Every spike placed leaves him more vulnerable to the Shard's influence, until resisting it becomes nearly impossible. For most of what remains of the original trilogy, Marsh isn't really making his own choices. Ruin, the Shard, is using him to hunt down Allomancers and ferrochemists for more hemalurgic material, killing without the hesitation that defined him before. Vin, by the climax of Hero of Ages, has essentially given up on the idea that Marsh is still in there. This isn't Marsh, she thought. Kelsier's brother is long dead. This is something else. Ruin. she's not entirely right. At Craddock Shore, in the middle of Ruin's control, Marsh manages one act of desperate defiance. He reaches over and rips the hemalurgic earring out of Vin's ear, the spike that had been blocking her access to preservation's power. One tiny action, but arguably the single most important thing Marsh has ever done, because it severs Ruin's influence over Vin and restores her connection to preservation at the moment that she needs it most. Ruin asserts control almost immediately afterwards. Marsh, still puppeted, kills Allomancer at the Battle of Hassin, and that loss sparks an emotional rage within Vin as the vessel of preservation, and is what finally pushes Vin to sacrifice herself and destroy Ruin's vessel entirely. And that is what finally frees Marsh. Vin pays for it with her life. Marsh survives the Catasandra that follows, free for the first time in years of a god's direct control. So this wasn't the end for Marsh. There was a new vessel of ruin, Caesared, in the form of the combined Shard of Harmony. And Marsh still standing, still spiked, still carrying every power Ruin drove into him against his will. And as you will see, 300 years later, he hasn't stopped yet. By the time we catch up with Marsh again, 300 years have passed. He's an agent of harmony now. Caesared's composite shard formed of preservation and ruin together. Marsh sustains his unnaturally long life by compounding atium, burning it in a way that allows him to draw far more ferrochemical store than ordinary use would allow. He is, as far as anyone knows, the only living person with access to such a broad collection of both allomantic and ferrochemical abilities, a result of the hemalurgic spikes still embedded throughout his body. 22 by the current count, though the full breakdown has never completely been confirmed in the text, leaving several of Marsh's powers open to speculation. The population of Elendar and the Basin knows the legend, Ironeyes, Death himself walking among the living. For someone feared across an entire civilization, Marsh actually appears surprisingly little. The first comes in the Alloy of Law, after Miles' 100 Lives execution. Mercy notices a figure watching from the alleyways and follows him. It's Ironeyes. He hands her a book of Spook's old notes on Hemalurgy, and tells her to pass it to Wax rather than deliver it himself. He confirms that he's an agent of harmony, and gives her the reason for the book. He believes Wax is doing Kelsier's work. Then he vanishes again. 2 entire books pass before Marsh finally steps back onto the page in The Lost Metal. There, he reports back after his own search for atium in Bilming, having picked up on something unusual happening in the city. The lead he hands off, a missing man named Tabal Copper, becomes part of what pulls Wax, Wayne and Mercy into the city's affairs. It's also where Marsh raises the identity contamination problem. The reason he says why Trail's spiked agents can't compound their powers the way that he can. What stumps him is how those agents manage more than 3 spikes at all. Ordinarily, 4 or more should leave someone open to Harmony's direct control. The exact threshold the set itself worked around with Telsin for years by deliberately keeping her below it. Mercy works out part of the answer later in the book. A spike recovered from a set agent turns out to be Trellium, the metal that hides its wearer from Harmony, and it's what lets them cross that line without consequence. Trellium is a god metal we will look at in future videos, allowing them to bypass the 3 spike limit by virtue of the hiding properties that Trellium provides against Harmony. So Dumad and Gertruda, the main antagonists of the Lost Metal, hold far more than 3 powers. Dumad, for example, has steel, allomancy and ferrochemy, duralumin, pewter and bronze, all enabled by the Trellium, which allows Dumad to spike himself and remain out of the influence of Harmony. What's interesting is that Marsh barely needs to appear. In Shadows of Self and Bands of Mourning, he never shows up at all, yet his presence is everywhere. What's there instead is a religious structure built around him, Sliverism. The way characters like Steris talk about Ironeyes as something real and frightening. He shapes those 2 books without showing up in either of them. And underneath all of it, Marsh is running out of time. His atium, the thing keeping him alive after 300 years, is nearly gone. He tells Wax, Mercy and Wayne that his atium reserves are running out. Without some alternative solution, the centuries that hemalurgy and compounding brought him might finally come to an end. There's something quietly tragic in that, given everything that came before. Who gave up leading a rebellion, who lost the woman he loved, who was turned into a weapon against his will, has spent the century since trying to do some genuine good as Harmony's agent. The clock on that is now finally running down. Marsh is also aware, in a small but striking detail, that his brother became a cognitive shadow after death. 2 brothers, both of whom should be dead, both of whom found a way to keep existing, just through very different means. One survived by becoming something more than human. The other survived by becoming something less. 300 years later, Marsh is still here. Still serving Harmony, still carrying the spikes, still wearing the face of death. So the next question is, how much longer can Marsh survive? If you've liked the video so far, like and subscribe for more content so that you can be there when the next video about the foreshadowed ending of the Stormlight Archive from the Way of Kings goes live. But anyway, let's continue. The atium, the cognitive realm, and the theory that death stopped being a metaphor. So what's next for Marsh? The Lost Metal ends without answering the question it spends the whole book quietly building towards. Marsh is running out of time. His atium reserves are dwindling. The method that has kept him alive for 3 centuries is failing, and for the first time since the Cassandra, there is a visible clock hanging over his future. The simplest explanation is also the most obvious one. Marsh will find another way to survive. There are good reasons why many readers expect exactly that. The Lost Metal revealed that atium is not gone forever. Through the interaction of harmonium and trellium, modern Scadrians have effectively rediscovered a way of producing it. The quantities involved are tiny, nowhere near enough to solve Marsh's problem overnight, but the principle matters. But now the question is whether it can be produced reliably and at scale. Harmony knows exactly what's keeping him alive, and we know that Harmony has ordered the Kandra to try to reproduce this effect. And Marsh is hardly facing that problem alone. Kelsier has spent centuries pursuing his own solutions to mortality, and Hemalurgy remains one of the least understood and least predictable systems in the Cosmere. Taken together, many readers see Marsh's dwindling atium supply less as a death sentence and more as a problem waiting for someone to solve. The Scadrians do seem technically proficient. We do know, after all, that there are flying airships with a much greater capability when compared with Navani's 4th bridge. When compared with Rashar, technology is Scadrial's strong point. This remains one of the most widely accepted predictions for Marsh's future. At the same time, the Lost Metal leaves behind a pair of details that don't seem directly connected to the atium problem at all. The first comes in the epilogue. Marsh walks through a crowded public park in the middle of Ellendale and nobody reacts to him. Steris attributes it to emotional allomancy, a trick that he's known to use. Wax isn't convinced, and the text never settles the matter. Strange, no? Quite clearly a seed that Sanderson has left for us. Now the second comes from Chris, a prominent Cosmere arcanist. This off-world scholar notes that stories about Ironeyes are spreading far beyond Scadrial itself. Tales of death with nails through his eyes have reportedly reached other worlds, including Lumar. Marsh has become recognisable to people who have never even seen it, never met him, and in some cases may not even know where the stories originated. 2 unusual details: a man who seems increasingly difficult to notice, and a legend spreading well beyond the world that created it. Those details have led to one of the most discussed theories surrounding Marsh's future. The theory suggests that Marsh is changing. 3 centuries of stories, worship, fear and belief may be transforming him into something fundamentally different from what he was at the end of Hero of Ages. This is because perception matters in the Cosmere. The cognitive realm is shaped by how people think about the world around them. Invested entities can be influenced by how they are perceived. Identity, connection and belief all have measurable effects on magical systems throughout the setting. Marsh presents a uniquely strange case. His spirit web, which is essentially the soul of a person within the spiritual realm, has been altered by Hemalurgy more extensively than almost any known living person. For centuries, he has been viewed not merely as a man, but as a concept. Ironeyes and death, the figure who comes for souls when their time is over. Harmony has reinforced that perception repeatedly. Harmony has at times used Marsh in a role that closely resembles the one that many Scadrians already imagine him occupying. Take a look at this quote from the Lost Metal.
"I didn't meet his soul mercy. I only do that some of the time, when Sage invests me with the power. I think he liked the idea of me living up to the stories people decided to tell about me. It's his way."
The theory proposes that 300 years of consistent perception are beginning to have consequences. That Marsh is becoming increasingly anchored in the cognitive realm rather than solely in the physical one. Not necessarily a cognitive shadow in the same way as Kelsier, not a spren or a shard, but something we haven't seen before. And viewed through that lens, both mysteries start to look different. Perhaps a being that exists partly as an idea might not attract the same attention an ordinary person does. And if Marsh's cognitive presence is becoming stronger than it once was, it may help explain why stories about him seem to spread with unusual persistence across planetary boundaries. It's a strange theory, but it ties together several otherwise disconnected details. It also intersects the question of immortality. Many heavily invested entities exist under very different rules than ordinary humans. Spren don't age, Seons don't age. Cognitive entities often interact with time and mortality in ways that physical beings simply don't. As you will recall from other videos, cognitive shadows are fixed by their intent, and Zahel refers to them as Spren masquerading as men. Now Marsh isn't a cognitive shadow, but through the perception of others, he is becoming more cognitive in nature. If Marsh is gradually becoming something more cognitive in nature, the limitations imposed by his current atium supply may not remain the defining factor in his future forever. And the theories don't stop there. Another theory frequently connected to Marsh involves Discord, a theory heavily discussed online, including by viewers of this channel. Throughout Era 2, Sanderson repeatedly reminds readers that Harmony's balance is becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Preservation and ruin are not naturally cooperative forces. Sazed holds them together through willpower, but even in-world prophecies point towards the possibility of discord. He shall defend their ways, yet shall violate them. He will be their saviour, yet they shall call him heretic. His name shall be discord, yet they shall love him for it. Marsh occupies a uniquely important position if that future comes to pass. He's Harmony's oldest surviving agent, one of the last living links to the original trilogy, a man deeply connected to both ruin and preservation. He spent years as ruin's unwilling instrument before spending centuries serving Harmony. For those reasons, many readers expect Marsh to have an important role to play if discord becomes a major force in future eras. Some theories extend even further. If Marsh continues becoming increasingly associated with death itself, perhaps he eventually occupies a role similar to an avatar, a permanent expression of one aspect of a shard's power. Not necessarily an avatar of ruin in the formal sense, but being closely tied towards Harmony's destructive aspect. This remains highly speculative. What stands out, however, is that many of the major theories surrounding Marsh point in a similar direction. Whether the mechanism involves Hemalurgy, Investiture, Perception, Discord, or something else entirely, very few predictions involve Marsh remaining exactly how he is now. And in some ways, that will be a fitting continuation of the story we've followed so far. Marsh's life has been defined by transformation. He lost his mother, and he lost Mare. He gave up leadership of the rebellion, he lost his freedom to ruin, and he lost his humanity to Hemalurgy. And over 3 centuries, the man named Marsh gradually became the legend known as Ironeyes. Now his future sits at the intersection of some of Mistborn's biggest unanswered questions. The fate of atium, the emergence of discord, the nature of heavily invested beings. The relationship between perception and identity in the Cosmere. All of those threads lead back to the same person. Sanderson has said he's already looking forward to writing Mistborn's 3rd era. Marsh's unresolved future, the atium, the spread of the Ironeyes myth, and the questions surrounding Harmony's balance are all still waiting to be explored. 300 years after the fall of the Final Empire, Marsh remains one of the most mysterious figures in the Cosmere. And somewhere out among the stars, people who have never heard Marsh's name are already telling stories about death with nails through his eyes. To close the video out, what gets me about Marsh is how hard he tried not to matter. He gave up leading the rebellion, he gave up his name inside the ministry, he gave up, for a long stretch, control over his own actions entirely. Every single time, history has found a way to make him important anyway. He is being worshipped for an identity he never asked for, sustained by a fuel source that's about to disappear, and if the theory holds, on the verge of becoming something that was never fully a person to begin with. Kelsier gets to be the legend that everybody remembers fondly, and Marsh is an aspect of death, a man nobody can even look at. Like, subscribe, and get in the comments. I want to know what you think Marsh is turning into. Vote on the next topic in the community post, because if I have the question, maybe you do too. I'll see you in the next one.